This is the most direct way of robbing an armored car I have ever seen.
3, 2.
Not only that, but this man also knows the answer to every question in Quiz Game.
Seneca is the largest of these lakes in west central New York.
What are the Finger Lakes?
Jim,
What are the Finger Lakes?
correct.
The reason why this man can be all-knowing is that he is trapped in the same day and he has no idea how long he has been stuck in this loop. Phil is a famous weather reporter, and every year on this day he goes to a small town to report on the local Groundhog Day. People say if the groundhog can see its shadow, it means that early spring will come from today. However, Phil is tired of reporting on Groundhog Day and just wants to finish the job quickly. But his new colleague Rita is very interested in the celebration, and their driver and photographer Larry also joins them. When they arrive in town, Phil doesn't want to stay in a rundown hotel, so he finds a luxurious bed and breakfast for himself. The next day at 6 o'clock, the alarm clock rang and the radio broadcasted news about Groundhog Day. After looking at the clean streets, Phil dressed and prepared to go out. Then a man greeted him, but Phil didn't want to talk too much and just said a few simple greetings before going downstairs. The owner of the bed and breakfast was serving guests downstairs and asked Phil if there would be a big snowstorm tonight. Phil told her that a southern warm current would blow in, so it was impossible to snow. The owner asked if he would check out today.
Chance of departure today, 100%.
Then Phil walked out and met a homeless man, and he touched himself, pretending he didn't carry his wallet. At this moment, a man shouted at Phil. It was Ned, Phil's high school classmate and now an insurance salesman. He tried to sell his business to Phil, but Phil didn't remember him and didn't want to buy insurance. After a few perfunctory words, he wanted to leave, but he stepped into a puddle when crossing the road. When Phil arrived at the festival site, Larry and Rita were already ready. Rita excitedly talked about the festival in town last night, thinking it was very interesting, but Phil didn't care. He just wanted to end it quickly and go home. Then the fat groundhog was brought out, which also happens to be named Phil. The Phil with the same name didn't go to see it, just quickly finished the report and then planned to leave the town by car. But just after driving for a while, it started to snow and the road ahead began to be blocked. Phil asked the traffic police and learned that the snow had blocked the road, so they had to return to the town. Phil returned to the bed and breakfast and prepared to take a hot bath, but there was no hot water today. The next day at 6 o'clock, the alarm clock rang again and the radio broadcasted news about Groundhog Day. Phil thought it must be the radio host who was lazy and played yesterday's recording again, but when he opened the curtain and looked out, the street was clean and there was no trace of the storm from yesterday. Phil was very confused. When he finished washing and walked out of the room, he met the man from yesterday again, who said the same thing as yesterday. Phil thought he was deliberately teasing him and walked down the stairs with a look of doubt. Then the owner of the bed and breakfast stopped him and asked if he would check out today.
I'd say the chance of departure is 80%.
When he went out, the homeless man was still standing in the same place, and this time Phil didn't have any money like the last time. Ned appeared again and tried to sell him insurance. Phil didn't want to pay attention to him and quickly left. However, he stepped into the same puddle again. When he arrived at the festival, he told his colleague Rita about this strange experience, but Rita asked him to finish filming before talking. But Phil didn't have the mood anymore. He left after shooting half of it. In the evening, Phil was once again doused with cold water. Before going to bed tonight, he broke a pencil in half, but when he woke up, the pencil was intact. He was angry and wanted to tell someone. The same things that happened over the last 2 days made him crazy. Phil could only take Rita to a restaurant and tell her about the whole thing. Suddenly, a waiter broke a plate and scared Phil. After hearing his story, Rita found it hard to imagine how Phil got trapped in the same day. She thought he was making up stories, or it would be best to get his brain checked. Phil thought for a while and went for a brain check, but the doctor told him that everything was normal. At night, Phil met 2 friends while drinking. They were both heavily drunk. Phil planned to take them home. On the way, one of them asked, "What if there is no tomorrow?" The other replied, "If there is no tomorrow, then there are no consequences. They can do whatever they want." Phil was awakened by this statement and immediately crashed into a trash can on the side of the road. A police car quickly followed behind them, but Phil didn't stop. He accelerated and headed towards the train tracks. Just as he was about to collide with the train, he made a sharp turn back onto the road. Phil laughed like crazy. He had never been this crazy before. Of course, in the end, Phil couldn't escape being locked up in a jail cell. When morning came, Phil woke up on a familiar bed. He jumped up excitedly. Since he couldn't change it, he decided to enjoy it to the fullest. He walked downstairs and passionately kissed the innkeeper, then went to the corner where he found Ned still being friendly.
Phil Connors!
Ned?
Phil returned to the puddle after someone else had stepped on it, then elegantly crossed it. Then he pulled Rita to the restaurant for a meal. However, this time Phil ordered all the high-calorie foods that he usually dared not eat in order to maintain his figure. After all, if tomorrow would never come, he didn't have to worry about gaining weight after eating. Rita hated this lack of self-control and left without looking back. Phil was also ready to leave, but he saw a beautiful lady next to him. He approached her and started a conversation. He learned that her name was Nancy and she had attended Lincoln High School. And so the daily cycle began again. Phil met Nancy in the park and pretended to be a high school classmate. In surprise, Nancy greeted him back. Actually, Nancy had no idea who Phil was, but hearing him say so, she assumed they were high school classmates and that she had simply forgotten him. With just a few words, Nancy fell for Phil.
You look terrific. You look very, very terrific.
In just one day, Phil and Nancy embraced together. In the days that followed in the perpetual loop, he would rob an armored car and date different women in town. He might even run into Nancy at the theater. One day, Phil invited Rita to the restaurant again. He opened his heart and confessed his feelings to Rita without any hesitation. As expected, he was rejected directly. So let's do it again. He invited Rita to a bar this time. The first time, he didn't know what drink to order for her. So let's do it again. Phil ordered the right drink for her. But the second time, he didn't know the toast word she preferred. Everything went smoothly before this. He guessed that Rita studied journalism in college, but unfortunately, Rita majored in French poetry. So let's do it again. This time, he started with a French poem. Rita was surprised that Phil actually knew French. Throughout the day, Rita was amazed by how well Phil knew her. She felt like he was her soulmate. At night, Rita followed Phil to his room. Phil held Rita in his arms and they kissed. But just as he was about to progress further, Rita suddenly realized something.
Oh no, I can't believe I fell for this. This whole day has just been one long setup.
No, it hasn't.
And I hate fudge. Yuck.
Then Rita angrily left. Afterward, Phil tried a few more times, but they all ended in failure. After that, Phil became depressed and would intentionally break alarm clocks or smash them to pieces. He also tried different ways to commit suicide, including getting hit by a tram or jumping off a building. In the end, he simply stopped caring. There is no substitute for the original movie. A good film is worth watching it yourself. But you don't know where you can watch these movies? Use Superbox. With Superbox, you can access all live TV channels in 4K quality. It also provides access to over 13,000 movies and series, and updates with the newest content very often. The total cost for one of these is 2 months of your cable bill. Then you never have to pay fees or bills ever again. Click the link in my bio and use my code to get it at a better price.